Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all fitting well. In the afternoon here in sunny Germany, so it's time for another 5 albums. These 5 albums are certainly the first 4 anyway, are linked with around 7 or 8 years, and then the last one's a fairly modern album. As yesterday's choices were, they're from different genres of music, you could argue, and there's a couple amongst these selections today that are my very favourites. Okay, I'm kicking off in 1973 actually, and this particular album, some might say is a very strange choice, but I think this is Marc Bolan's best album actually. So this is Tanks from 1973. It's the back of the thing. And before I talk about the thing, let me just show you the inside. I love the whole package there. So you've got all the tanks. There we go. And then you've got this very nice, massive poster that used to be on my wall. Hopefully you can see that. There he is, stretching over the tank. Okay, right, this album then. In some ways, I think this was the album that was the last of his big run, because before this was Slider, and then obviously Electric Warrior. I don't know. I think this has got a lot of keyboard textures on the album. There's some fantastic musicianship on here, but typical T-Rex albums at the time. They really didn't tell you who was playing on there. I know that there's a lot of keyboards on here, and I'm not quite sure who's the keyboard player. Perhaps somebody out there can enlighten me. But I think it's 13 absolutely fabulous tracks. Again, someone would argue that the singles that he had just prior and perhaps after this album came out should have been included on here, and perhaps it would have made the album more successful than what it actually eventually became, because Children of the Revolution, I think, should have been on there, because that would have, catapulted the thing to number 1. This didn't go to number 1, whereas previous 2 did. What have we got on here then? Well, it starts off with Tenement Lady. I think it's a great song. Rapids, Mr. That got some airplay, but it's an album track. Broken Hearted Blues, that's a lovely sort of folky, with a bit of keyboards on there. Very nice track. Shock Rock, well, you can imagine by the title of the song what type of area of music is coming from on that one. Country Rock, Country Honey, that's a nice little tune. And then the first side ends with Electric Slim Hat and the Factory Hen. Very strange title to a song, but it's a good song. Turn the record over, as you do. Hopefully you can see the titles there. There they are. Side 2 was Mad Donna. I'm not quite sure if that was a single or not, but Born to Boogie was. And I'm not sure, but I think there was a lot of association with with Ringo Starr on here, and there he is, because I think on the back of this album they made the film Born to Boogie. So you've got Ringo. I actually think he's playing on the album. I'm not sure where. Nilsson's on the back of this cover as well. So I'm assuming that he was associated with Mark at the time. But going back to the tracks on the album, then "Life Is Strange." That's probably one of my favourite tracks on the album. The The Street and Babe Shadow. That's a brilliant song as well. Highway Knees, and then the album finishes with the magnificent Left Hand Luke. As I said, this came out in 1973, and yeah, it was his last real successful album. It was certainly, or is certainly, a different sounding album to anything he'd done up to that stage. And I really, really liked the fact that this album is very diverse. He'd been listening to a lot of American soul, blues music, which came out in the material as well. I think Gloria Jones, I think he'd met up. I think they were together, and it may be Gloria Jones that's playing some of the keyboards on here. Actually, I'm not sure if Mickey Finn. Yes, he is. Mickey Finn's there. There he is. I was just going to say, I wonder if he was still with him, but there he is. And the other two as well. Mark Curry, was it, and Bill Legend. There they are. So the format of T-Rex was still on this album, but I think after this one, I think it was Curry. Did he leave? I'm not sure. But this definitely was not as successful as his previous albums, and I think it was due to the fact that there was the singles that he was releasing in 1973 were magnificent, but they weren't on here, and I think that's what sold most of his albums, the fact that the big hits were on there, but on here they weren't. Great album. So that's my first choice. That's going to go on later today. T-Rex, Tanks. Okay. The next one then is a debut album, actually, by a great singer, musician, and artist in his own right. That actually, by the time he got round to doing this first solo album, he had been with Spencer Davis Group, Traffic. So I think you know who I'm talking about. This is the first Steve Winwood album, and I think, yeah, it's probably my favourite as well. It took a long time to make this album because, when Traffic ended, I think it was 76. This came out in 77, I think it was. Let me just check. Let's have a look. Yep, 77. So the height of punk, one could argue, but I think Traffic had ended 75. I think it was when it eventually sort of ended. We all know he reformed the band in the 90s. But this is a truly fantastic album. You've got 6 very, very well put together tracks. The one that really stands out for me is this track, Vacant Chair. And that was written by Steve and Viv Stansell. Viv Stansell does the words, or wrote the lyrics and words for the song. But what you've got on here is a very funky based, and in some ways African influenced as well. But the guitar player on this particular album is Julian Junior Marvin from Bob Marley and the Wailers. He was playing with Bob Marley at the time, and it's such a funky vibe on that. Alan Spenner's on bass, and then John Suswell on drums. Wonderful, wonderful track. There is a single version of it, but this particular version is the longer one. But as I said, it was Viv Stansell that wrote the words for the song. The other songs on this side, this is the second side, are all written together with Jim Capaldi, believe it or not. So, although Traffic had, sort of folded, there was obviously still a great association with Jim Capaldi, because he wrote along with Steve the next track, which is Looks In, and then Let Me Make Something in Your Life. That's a beautiful, beautiful ballad. You've got Reebok Kwai Bai on here. Willie Weeks, great bass guitar player. And Andy Newick on drums. Great track, that one. Let Me Make Something in Your Life it's just Stevie with Willie Weeks on bass, and then Andy Newick on drums. It's a beautifully put together ballad. So that's the second. I've started with the second side. The first side kicks off with Hold On, which again was written with Jim Capaldi. It doesn't appear on the album at all. In fact, he does in a minute. Again, we got Willie Weeks and then Andy Newick, Hold On. Time Is Running Out. Now, again, this is the only track with Jim Capaldi. He wrote the lyrics, and he's actually on percussion and backing vocals on there. Nicole, which is Steve's sister, she's on backing vocals. You got Reebok again, Willie Weeks again, and then Andy Newick. And then the final track, which is this Midland Maniac, which is just Stevie. 6 quite long tracks, but unfortunately, the album didn't do a great deal, which was a shame, really. It was another, let me think, 4 years before he made Arc of a Diver, totally on his own, which obviously became the success that it was, and then launched his solo career. But this first album really did nothing, and I think Island Records didn't get the timing right. When you consider that, this is rhythm and blues, it's soul music, it's a bit of progressive rock in there, bit of jazz as well, African influenced as well. This sort of music was not popular, shall we say, in 1977, because everybody was either listening to the Pistols, the Clash, Talking Heads, or television. And that was about your lot, really. So Stevie at the time was deemed as, one of these dinosaur progressive rock musicians. Could be anything further from the truth. The man has got such a fantastic, soulful voice, and this, I believe, this album just brings that element of Steve Winwood out, his first album. As you have heard, there's not a lot of musicians really involved in the process, really, and I think that's a good thing, because it brings out the quality of the material and the fact that he's a great singer. There's no one hindering him with all your pops and farts of trying to play around and make the material better than actually than what it is. Well, the material's great, and you don't need any fancy pants in there trying to make it better, because it's great. Produced by Steve and Chris Blackwell. Love that cover. Love that cover. It's a beautiful painting. Really, really great. Do like that. James Hutchison did that one. So my second choice is Steve Winwood by Steve Winwood, 1977. Okay, moving on. Just literally a year later. This album in many ways was a precursor for what this actually became a year later, and I think after the previous tour with the band, they all needed a break from one another, and they did do that. This particular artist and the keyboard player, and yeah, the drummer, they all made a solo album, and ironically, the main man that was to force them all in a different direction didn't. And the album I'm talking about is the first David Gilmour album. This is just an absolutely superb album. It's not like anything that David had done, certainly within the band anyway. There are elements of What the Wall in some ways where Gilmour was involved in the process do sound. I Can't Breathe Anymore could definitely have been on that album. It just uses two of the musicians on the album. The rest of it is David himself. So you've got Rick Willis on bass and vocals and Willie Wilson on drums. And this is fabulous album. The one that does it for me is Short and Sweet, which is the first track on the second side. And the reason it does it for me is because it was written with Roy Harper. And ironically, Roy sings on it. Roy re-recorded that song on his album in 1980, and Gilmour played the guitar for him. So there's two fantastic versions of this song. You could argue that this one is the great one, you know. But we've got 9 great tracks. You know, it starts off with an instrumental, Mill House, and then There's No Way Out of Here. Again, that could have fitted on the wall, I think. Cry from the Street and So Far Away, great stuff. Side 2, I've already mentioned Short and Sweet, and then you've got Raise My Rent, No Way, great track. Definitely, and then I Can't Breathe Anymore. 1978 this came out, and this is, I think a lot of people would say that this is his best solo album. And I think probably the reason behind that is that there's actually no involvement whatsoever from anybody else associated with Floyd towards him. He was on his Todd, you know, and he picked, let's be honest, he picked 2 fairly, well, you know, the known within the music fraternity. Rick Willis was part of, I think did he not go to Foreigner? I think he was in Foreigner. Willie Wilson, not quite sure where he ended up. But there's some There's some great stuff on here, really, really great stuff. If you don't know this album, you love your Floyd, you like David Gilmour, because he doesn't, I think maybe Short and Sweet, he's played a few times, but everything else from here, certainly on his recent tours anyway, obviously, he's trying to promote whatever album he's promoting at the time. But this tends to now, or in recent years, just completely overshadows it. It doesn't get any play at all. He doesn't play any of them live, which is a shame, because they're great. The 9 great songs. So, third choice then, David Gilmour by David Gilmour. Fourth choice. This album is from 1981. It was first issued. However, when you consider that this was recorded in 1979 into 1980, and the fact that the band which both of them are associated with, recorded just a mind-blowing album in 1980, for them both just to leave that unit, that band, and record this. It's just a mind-blowing album. It's the only way I can describe it. And it's Brian Eno and David Byrne, My Life in the Bush of Ghost. I believe that this album was to change the face of music. It really, really did. This album is the first album, really, that incorporated excuse me, different cut-up voice technique from a multitude of different countries around the world, be it someone singing, a conversation. There's even an exorcism on here. There's unidentified radio evangelists on here. There are, singers from Egypt, from the Middle East. There are singers that from Singapore, so they're known. You've got a Lebanese mountain singer on here. But what they've both done is brought in all these different voices and sounds from around the world, but created this ambient music to go, and there is no singing on here whatsoever. It's just all this found elements that have been brought in, because each of the 10, 11 pieces on here have all got different elements and sounds from around the world. However, they've created the music to go on the top of it. So on here, you've got Chris Frantz from Talking Heads, along with obviously David Byrne. But you've got Buster Jones, you've got Mingo Lewis, brilliant. Bill Laswell on bass, fabulous. Steve Scales, who was with Talking Heads later on in the tour. But the music has all been created by Brian Eno and David Byrne. This is just absolutely tremendous. I think the one that does stand out for a lot of people that know this album are 2 tracks: Help Me Somebody and The Jezebel Spirit. The Jezebel Spirit is literally music put to an exorcism that was going on in September 1980 in New York. It's just absolutely incredible. One of the tracks on here, this is the original album. I don't know if you can see that. First track on the second side is called Quran. Well, that actually on later copies was taken off because it was Algerian Muslims chanting the Quran, and that caused a lot of animosity amongst that particular fraternity of people, and it was later removed. There is a fabulous CD version of this album, and it really is worth seeking out, because what that does is there was other pieces that were made, and some of them unfortunately didn't make the album, and some of them are sort of working sort of pieces of what actually ended up on here. This is just something else. No, no one. And when you consider that they're on the top of the game as well, they've just come back, and indeed they were on the fabulous tour that they were doing at the time, and it beggars belief that they had time to come out with this just amazing album. Absolutely fantastic. Again, Talking Heads, they sort of did a similar thing to what other bands had done in the past, not least Floyd and Yes did it. So they had a sort of 2-year break, and they thought, right, okay, we'll do solo albums. Each member of the band will do solo albums. So this was the first of that particular thing, so because there was a good 2 years before Stop Making Sense, all that sort of stuff came out. So but the fact that they had enough time to produce this monster was just amazing, absolutely amazing. If you don't know this album, strongly urge you to check it out, because this album has influenced so many people since 1981. The way that music now is produced and formed, this was the start of it. It really, really is. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so there's my fourth choice then. My Life in the Bush of Ghosts by Brian Eno and David Byrne. The last one then, we're moving right on to 2018. This young man, well, he's not young anymore, he's been going a few years now. He's certainly one of the most gifted German musicians to come out in the last, I don't know, I would say 10 years or whatever it is. Such a fantastic keyboard player and piano player. He's from a classical background, so he was a bit of a child prodigy. So when he was very young, he was winning all these youth competitions and classical competitions, and it was blatantly obvious that the young lad had a massive amount of talent, and that now has fruitioned into a fabulous career. But what he's done is he's not taken the classical path, which I think his parents and a lot of other musicians thought he would. There's classical elements to what he does, but it's a modern tack on the music that he produces. And the chap I'm talking about is Neil Fram, and this is his last studio album called All Melodies. This album is his first album in his new studio in Berlin, and just take this out. This studio is basically part of the studio, the Hansa studio in Berlin, where many people, including obviously Bowie, did his trilogy of albums. Well, what this part of the studio complex became available, and he bought Saal 3, which is hall number 3, with all the old equipment in the studio. So this is effectively where this album was recorded. There's no digital, it's all analog on here. All proper instruments. There are no sort of digital delays, loops, or anything like that. It's just recorded in the Funk House, which is basically the main studio. The Hansa Studios is Funk House in the old complex number 3. And effectively, this album is him producing music in that studio. This album is slightly different to what is produced before, because what he has is brought in choirs and drums and percussion, which is not done before. It really does bring out the quality of his playing and the material. There's bass marimbas on here. Anna Muller is on here on cello. And there are, sort of a quintet, quartet, septet on here as well. But it's all about Nils and his keyboards and his playing. It's just fabulous stuff. He's just released Tripping with Nils Frahm, and what that is is a live album. Actually, the live album is recorded in this studio, so we've got a selected audience here. It's just come out in last month, I think it was. So you've got a selected audience in his studio, and because of the sound quality of the studio, it is just phenomenal, the way it sounds. And that is to do with the way that the rooms have been built. It was all built by the East Germans, actually, in the 1930s, going into the 1940s. So, this complex in Berlin is associated with Deutsche Grammophon. So a lot of their material that's recorded and released are done in this complex. So they don't, Deutsche Grammophon don't muck about. Their sound engineers, the equipment that they've got is some of the best in the world. And Nils Frahm just happens to have part of that as a studio. This album, for those people that don't know, Nils Frahm started off as literally a piano player, but now he's brought in this armory of keyboards, all analog. There's no digital keyboards that he uses, and it's something else to see live. He's a one-man army. It's just absolutely tremendous to see live. And in many ways, this album, All Melody, you can see or you can hear, because a lot of it's recorded live. There's not many overdubs and buggering about with the thing, and you can hear that in his playing. You can actually hear him striking the keys on the keyboard. It's just phenomenal stuff. So what's it like then? Well, it's electronic, it's classical, there's a bit of jazz in there. There's elements, if you like, sort of tangerine, dreamy, ambienty type pieces within the album as well. And then you get beautiful sort of traditional classical pieces, and then you can then there are, you know, sort of, as I said, the first time that he's done this is to bring percussion into the mix. So he creates his keyboard effects around the percussion, which is very, very interesting. Well worth checking out. As I've done before, I think what I'll try and do is to go through YouTube and post some stuff that may be an introduction to the albums for you. Okay, well that's it for today then. Thursday selection. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. That you may want to go out and check some of these albums because they all are particularly good. Okay, right. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.